which, the slide down into the Inferno is this gradual, tiered progress, as it were, down to the icy lake, but maybe Austin has a more profound sense of human.
Well, I don't know about that. One of the reasons I tend not to is that she so feels that just people would just exert themselves a little. Whose sensibility and Marianne, if she just or the mother would exert herself a little, and no, I think, and of course another way in which there's kind of, there are people who are sent to a kind of hell. I think the worst hell is Mrs. Norris and Maria in Mansfield Park, this is the Maria who committed adultery and the rest of it, and she's set off.
Spend the rest of her life with that Norris.
With that Norris, who is, and it says, and their tempers are made for them to torment one another. Now that's about the worst you get in the whole thing. Even Wickham, is saved and looked after and so on and so forth. So, and I'm so impressed. Keep thinking again and again over these marriages in Pride and Prejudice, the one between Charlotte Lucas and the ridiculous Mr. Collins, which works nonetheless, and also with Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. After all, that's another totally ridiculous couple. She married him. He married her for her beauty. She turns out to be a complete, social climbing, silly person. And then so he spends his life being amused by her and by all the follies of his family, and in his library, and expending his whole income on what he eats and drinks and reads in his library. So, but nonetheless, nobody gets damned in that family in the end, because Darcy comes in and saves even Lydia and Wickham. So
doesn't that somewhat undermine the thesis that the institution of marriage is ultimate bliss? That
yes, this is where I'm actually trying to decide. I think you can never decide with Jane Austen where the irony is. Because it always seems that the irony may be just at the point where you think she's not being ironic at all. She's taken over this language of marriage's felicity and the ultimate bliss and so and wish you joy and all the rest. But then she seems in these kinds of things to be undermining that, which is why I say that we reach this kind of point here, and then I think Jane may be moving us somewhat beyond it.
But it's a genre in romance, isn't it? And in Shakespeare too. The comedies and romances end with weddings.
Yes.
It's about more than just the wedding. It's a figure in a way of a certain kind of happiness in the flesh.
Yes. So that's really what I'm saying, of course, too. But
I'm just worried that you're going a little too quickly to Nietzsche and demolishing it all before we see the glory of.
My dear, it's quite a long time before you get to Nietzsche. It takes a couple of generations. It takes the evangelicals, and then it takes them to turn their evangelical piety into moralism, right, in the way that Himmelfarb has showed us, and then it takes us another whole century to get, as you described it yesterday, the complete dissolution of marriage as we now have it. It just really, like it's disappeared. So it took a while.
Austen never herself married.
What?
She never married.
No. She was. There was at least one possibility. He turned into probably a hanging judge in Ireland. He turned into a Lord Chief Justice of Ireland, but he needed money and she didn't have any.
Okay, we have a question here.
Good.
I was just wondering where the courtly love traditions of the medieval troubadours and stuff would fit into this.
Well, of course, they belong into Dante, and I suppose to some extent they come down to people like Fielding and so on through Cervantes. But from what I could understand, I mean, I was quite amazed when I began to look at what Fielding knew, and I mean, the degree to which he's a Platonist, and I mean, the degree to which he's a follower of one of the greatest minds in the 18th century, one of the greatest theological and scientific minds in the 18th century, or 17th, 18th century. Barrow, I mean, Barrow is his great hero. People read Barrow's sermons and are converted. And Barrow, in my view, is a Platonist ultimately. So, I mean, I think that's very important. So I'm tremendously impressed by how much Fielding knew and how much of the whole tradition of every kind, mythological, theological, and so on, scientific, he could draw on. But, at least according to the information, no one alleges any knowledge of Dante. And apparently Dante is coming, according at least to what the critics say, Dante is being, at this point, it's Blake who's interested in Dante, but Blake is also unknown. So, I mean, so there will be through things like indirectly, like, I mean, because the courtly love tradition is definitely there in someone like Cervantes, right?
But is a smile a sufficient consummation?
Yeah, because it's a tradition of embodied love, the courtly love tradition,
Yes.
without marriage necessarily. Or
Yes,
without
yes, exactly.
any form of physical union, but it is that person. It's not a contemplation of anything beyond that.
Right.
And I suppose
So what point now are you making? I mean.
Well, that you don't need marriage for a kind of secular idea of a love through union. And I wonder perhaps, I mean, I'm thinking on my feet now, but I wonder if perhaps the sort of apocalyptic solutions of someone like Wagner, for example, is actually the sort of the ultimate expression of this alternative to marriage.
Yes. Well, as I tend to look at you know the romance, I mean, you're right. It can be looked at as but it all seems at the same time so idealized that it's definitely not domestic.
No.
I mean, it you know, it's, you know, when people look at its social origins, it's all these guys hanging around after everyone went off the crusade, after the husbands went off the crusades.
But if in marriage, such as we see it in Fielding, is there some kind of convergence of the courtly tradition?
Well,
and you might say good old-fashioned sex and progeny. I mean,
well, I mean, what I
come
don't.
together somehow.
Yeah, I mean, look. So far as I know, the only way they would be coming together is, as I say, it seems to be not through any direct relation to Dante. Okay, but I mean, there is. I mean, he talks about. Odysseus said. Who was at home for Odysseus? Penelope, right at the beginning, and this journey, it's epic, comic, prose journey, and it's definitely an imitation of Cervantes. He's very clear about that.
But the question is, of your paper is that they're all somehow connected to this Platonic
yes.
narrative about Eros and
yes.
beautiful.
That's right.
Are you suggesting that Fielding's account of the consummation is, can we measure it against Dante's account? Is Fielding's account a better account or a worse account? Is it a more complete account or is it a lesser account? Is it falling away from, is Dante's vision, you might say, of the possession of the beautiful as noble as Fielding's? I'm kind of inclined from your paper to think that there's something more noble about Fielding's.
Well, I'm not actually in that kind of metric business. So,
but that is to say, it's a more Christian account.
Whose is?
Fielding's than Dante's. Fielding is a more thorough Christian than Dante is.
Well,
Dante's still, you might say,
well, that's of course
Virgil.
Well, yes, dear, but that's fine. I mean, you have to decide where your Christianity lies.
Yeah.
I mean, mine is definitely not. I mean, let us just. I mean, we would have to begin so many questions about where the standards of judgment lay in order to explore that. But no, I mean, what counts as Christian then?
Well, incarnation?
Well, that's, I mean, we don't,
No, what I mean is that-
incarnation, well, incarnation and, you know, that, we find that already in the applicants, but I mean.
or resurrected body then? That there's some way, you might say, in which,
Well, I mean, they talk about that endlessly in Dante.
yeah, but there's some sense in which the consummation is beyond. I'm wondering about the imminence of the
Well, yes, but I
consummation,
mean, yes, but-
whether there's something about this secularity that has something profoundly Christian about it. This is a really important question.
Oh, well, okay.
Is the modern secular world, in some sense, a further development, a more profound development of the Christian idea?
Well, I would say definitely and absolutely not, okay? However, I would say it is a development,
Okay.
but not a profounder one. I think it's a destructive one, is what it is. I think it is that form of the development by which we will become the civilization which brought about the end of human civilization, which is what we are busy doing. I think it is the form of a uniting of the divine and the human, which is actually impossible for us. So, and I'm inclined to think in my kinder moments that, Christianity is true and destruction, okay? But but whatever it is, whatever this form of Christianity is, which enables this kind of incarnation into ordinary life in this kind of way. So one could also say, look, what's more Christian than Walmart? I mean, that is certainly the incarnation, is it not? So, incarnation is consumption or what? There are all kinds of incarnations. I don't think one is Christian simply by incarnation. I will agree with you that if you cut out certain fundamental presuppositions of Christianity and assume them, and then realize the assumed unconsciously, that's called Protestantism, then you will get what we have gotten. And you will get this. The trouble with it, and I would not deny that it is an important cultural Christian form. I don't deny that. I don't think it is the realization of, I hope it's not the realization of Christianity. There's still some Roman Catholics around. There's still some Eastern Christians around. There are still other kinds of Christians who didn't go in for it, don't go in for it. We're only forced into it, so to speak, insofar as the dominant, economic power and imperial power at the present time. But, there are other forms of Christianity still existed. So I don't think that we can simply turn Christianity into this. It is an important form. I would like to see some balances against it.
But you've traced a development from Richardson through Fielding
Yes.
to Austin.
Yes.
And you seem to say that there was a kind of a deepening, there was a profundity.
Yes, in that movement, yes.
Yeah, okay,
No,
that's really what I was referring to.
well, I would absolutely say so. I would absolutely say so. But no question about it. But perhaps that just occurs to me on the top of my head. Another contemporary of Jane Austen is Hegel.
Yeah.
And that would bring one to a very different kind of relation to, reality, if you know what I mean. That would actually be, if one could put it this way, in some kind of important sense, a restoration of the whole philosophical world as again, well, that brings another whole set of questions.
But the apotheosis of the bourgeois state, too.
Perhaps, and perhaps the opposite. Certainly both were developed out of it, and more. I don't think we will dogmatically assume a right-wing Hegelianism here.
Certainly not. But I'm really being a very bad chair.
No, you're not. You're behave just in the way you were taught to behave in Halifax.
There must be other questions lurking out there. Don't be shy. This is
Yes, sir.
Mr. Neely.
One thing that strikes me in terms of the development through the literary figures that you mentioned, is this real possibility of tragedy in what are ultimately traditionally comical or comedies in a way,
Right.
according to the old
Yes.
definition.
What a great thought.
Dante goes to hell, and there's this great realization, from talking with a number of people, we won't get into all kinds of examples, that it's a very real possibility and that he could be stuck there, but thank goodness that Virgil is there and we can keep moving on.
Right.
And also in Pamela, Death or Deliverance, there's a possibility of tragedy. Him fielding even questions of predestination to tragedy. But when we get to Austen, all of, I think, the great potentially tragic moments become ironic moments.
Oh, good. Let's hear this.
And I don't know if this is because Austen is really, in terms of the English novel, perhaps one of the first great modern novelists, but perhaps with this notion of modernity. And I'm throwing this out for you, I suppose, to see what you're saying. If the possibility of tragedy ends with Austen and with modernity, and all we have after that is black comedy, and what impact that would have on the metaphysical structure you were talking about.
Well, I never use, well, I don't say never, but I rarely use epochal language because I find too often we end up we move from the notion like modernity to some phenomenon. I prefer to talk about the phenomenon and then, see what to do with it. But I don't know, when we come to Austen, what have we come to? I mean, there's certainly a great deal, in many ways, the English, the 19th century is really a far richer period than the 18th century to novel, and we have wonderful things that also bring us very close to the interior of souls. And you think that there's nothing there but black comedy.
Is there any real tragedy in Austen? Is there a cosmological and metaphysical structure that allows for the kind of tragedy that you can still have in feeling?
See, Tori seems to think yes, because he wants to see her as a Calvinist, and people have confronted their possibilities, kicked God in the face, and are going to go to hell, so to speak. I don't see that. I think she basically has the same kind of latitudinarian idea of the human that is there fundamentally in Fielding, which is basically, that there's this good nature which you have to assume of everybody, basically, and it's very rare that people, and this is his characters are mixed, and the only two really bad people in Fielding are people who betray, but they just disappear from the scene. You know what I mean? I think Richardson is probably a figure where there's, I think it's scarier. I mean, and the violence is more real, and so on. I will agree with you that with that for Austen it disappears that everyone gets laughed at, including ourselves all the time, right? But what that leaves open as a possibility, I don't feel I can say. I
She
don't feel
puts
myself.
the words of Epicurus into the mouth of Mr. Bennett.
Oh, yes.
Remember that, what is our place here on earth but to make sport for our neighbors and in turn to make sport with them, or something like that.
Oh, that's right. Well, it's pure rural Nova Scotia. I mean, that's what life is about. I mean, you keep an eye on your neighbors so that you can laugh at them, and when you're a fool, they laugh at you.
Yeah.
I mean, Nova Scotia, one of the reasons it was difficult for me to write this paper, because in Nova Scotia you can sort of assume that people are reading Jane Austen. I mean, it's our period. It's when we were founded, right? yeah, I think there is that kind of ironic relation to things, and also there is enthusiastic religion, but that's certainly not what that's the wild stuff coming through in the same way that they're fighting it here. You know what I mean?
Other questions?
Well, I haven't done very well with that one, I'm afraid. I just don't know how to move on from I mean, I don't really know how to use Austin as a basis
Kind of
for
broad.
moving somewhere else. Pardon?
It was kind of broad too.
Well, and I mean, after I did cover quite a bit of ground already, to demand that I move further into the 19th century is perhaps a little more. But, I was hoping that somebody would be somewhat taken with the fact that when we talk about conversion, we don't start in any normally recognizable religious book. That's what I was hoping people would be most struck by. The structure of conversion is for everyone, everywhere in the Western tradition, fundamentally provided by some dialogues of Plato, into which the biblical traditions hook. And we can see them doing it if you get out your Septuagint and you get your Vulgate and you so on and so forth. You can actually see them doing it verbally. And if you could do a history of the interpretation of certain passages, and you can see that they are all interpreted through this fundamental pattern, which is Platonic. Which is why, of course, for me, I couldn't imagine a Christianity that isn't Platonic.
The first word of Jesus when he comes out of the wilderness to preach is metanoia.
Yes, exactly. That's right.
And if that isn't, I don't know whether he read the Republic.
And there's this whole period of there's at least 200 years and more of the Hellenization of Judaism before we get to Jesus, and we've already got some kind of Hellenized version of the world in there in the doctrine of the resurrection, which is, as we know, not a biblical doctrine. As the Sadducees were very clear, right? This belongs to the improvements of the religion that were required to be to bring it in line with the Hellenized world, perhaps the Egyptian world, but certainly across that spectrum. And the whole fight with the Maccabees turned into one of these amazing things of the victory of the conquered. In the sense that they became more and more Hellenized as a result. Now there are differences, of course, but the first thing to get over is this notion that we have this philosophical tradition, and then we've got this Platonic, this religious tradition out there. Whatever we have, the religious tradition, and I'm not saying that nothing comes out of the Bibles and out of those revelations, but they are made to converge. They converge in all sorts of ways, and it is, I think, really quite impossible to understand the biblical religions, if we want to call them that, without Platonism in the broadest sense, which includes Aristotle, by the way. I think we Platonists, we have, of course, had an enterprise, which is, it's perhaps in some ways the main effort of revolutionary scholarship as revolutionary activity for the last 200 years, in which we try to recuperate the body by getting rid of Hellenism. But what does it turn out to be? Except the kind of fraud where everyone sees their own face at the bottom of the scholarly well. It's all looking back, ideologically determined, and look back, and there are no assured scientific results. So we're right back with the same questions about, whether or not Jews and Greeks think differently. Well, not if their religions amount to anything. They were comings together.
This is Ms. Otto's thesis.
Sorry?
Jennifer Otto is just finishing up her doctoral
Oh.
thesis on Philo, and that's,
Well,
that's
God
the
bless
thesis.
Philo. I'm teaching a seminar in Philo again this year, and look, he may, talking. Is there anything that belongs to the future that there isn't there in Philo? I mean, you read again his record of what it means for Moses to enter into the darkness. I don't think it's just Gregory of Nyssa and Dionysius that come out the other end. I think it's also Plotinus. Well, it belongs to the same world, my dear. Plotinus was educated in Alexandria by a Christian. And the Christians were all carrying on the tradition of Philo. I think there's nothing more important it's certainly very important. As I said in the conference that you people organized at Istanbul, I really think it's great. I mean, really, Philo is just, you have to think and think and think about Philo again and look at how it was handed on. Well, this is another question, but anyway.
Well, maybe we could have a more casual conversation, have some wine and cheese while we're doing it.
Good,
So thank
absolutely.
you very much.
Well, thank you all.
Help yourselves, there's lots here, and there's also wine.
And there is also one. Maketh glad the heart.